So it's the day after Mother's Day, and I'm currently back at my parents' place in Pennsylvania, as you can tell. And it's been about over a year since I've been home, since I've seen my parents both in person. And some of you may have seen some of my other videos and know this, but I never really had necessarily the greatest relationship with my parents growing up. And definitely carried into adulthood and whatnot. And kind of in this year gap or so that I haven't been home, haven't seen them, it was intentional. I had set some rules, boundaries with myself and with them that I wouldn't come home. I wouldn't see them until certain changes were made, certain conditions were met, right? And I stuck true to that. I stuck true to that. And I remember when I made that vow or signed that contract with myself that I wouldn't be coming home, I had no idea how long the timing of it would last. Here we are a year later, and when I reflect on what's brought me home, a bunch of things can come to mind, right? You might be wondering, what changed? Did the criteria get met? Did they change? Did you change? What was it? When I think about it, it's a bit of everything. A bit of everything. So when I think back to when I had, set this sort of boundary or rule or whatnot, whatever you want to call it, it was more so to, in my mind, to protect this, this new way of being that I'm embodying with this creative path. And at least from my perspective, to be able to create in the way that I want to or wanted to at the time, I needed to keep my internal environment clear just as much as my external, right? And that comes down to relationships with friends, especially with family. I didn't want anything that could negatively affect my psyche, because otherwise I would bring it into my creative work, into my headspace when I would try to record videos or write or whatever. And that's the last thing I wanted. Right? I wanted to keep it as pure as possible. But what I realize now was that I wasn't necessarily protecting the creative path or whatever, because the creative path in and of itself is often born from pain, hurt, and suffering just as much as it is from joy, laughter on the other side, right? You need the entire spectrum. But what I was really protecting was myself. I was protecting myself from being hurt, from experiencing pain, But above all, I was preventing myself from being loved. I had this realization the days leading up to coming back, and that was a tough pill to swallow. Because when I think about it, right, in setting boundaries so rigid that you won't even see a person unless they change is an insurmountable task for anybody, right? You can't make someone change. Trying to make someone change just another form of control. Setting those conditions, those criteria, was a form of control for me. To try and control the sort of love that I would allow myself to receive, right? I guess in a perfect world, I thought that I could only let in the good love, right? Whatever good love is. The kind of love that we hear about, we think about, we see. It's a love that isn't supposed to hurt. It's supposed to feel good all the time. It's supposed to bring miracles and not nightmares. And in that sense, I thought that's what I was holding out for. That it'd be possible to only experience that kind of love, right? But I realized that in doing this, in setting these boundaries, these conditions, right? I was replicating, I was emulating exactly the kind of love I experienced growing up, the kind of love that I didn't want in my life. A love based on conditions, right? A love based on if my parents would change or if they would do the work. And little did I realize that I was doing the same for myself, right? Because at the end of the day, how you receive love and how you give love are both interlinked, right? And as just as much as the way that I believed I would be loved and how I would pursue that, as a kid or growing up, right? I believed it was based on conditions, on me performing and whatnot. I've also held myself to that same standard so many times, including now, right? That I'd only really be able to love myself if I met certain conditions, right? For the longest time when I was going through my teenage years, my young adult years, I struggled with a lot of, you know, body image, beauty issues, if you want to call it that. I wouldn't love myself unless I looked a certain way. When my skin was, peppered with acne and scarring and all that, I didn't love myself. When I'm not necessarily in the best shape, I have a hard time loving myself. And it shows, right? It shows in how I was trying to receive love as well. That I'd only receive it if conditions were met. I'd only give it if conditions were met, right? As much as I said that I love my parents, words are just words, right? It doesn't really mean anything if you don't show up. And I wasn't showing up, right? I said I love them, yet a year has passed since I've seen them. So when I think about what's changed, like I said, it's a bit of everything. They've definitely changed as I've gotten older. The conditions have fallen away as their fear for my well-being and my ability to support myself, my ability to figure my life out, those fears have dissolved away and given way to unconditional love. And it took me a damn long time to realize that. For me, on my end, I realized I had to go through that period. I had to go through that period of withholding the love I would receive from them and withholding the love I would give as well. And everything I realized in that time that love is just love, right? There is no good love, there is no bad love. Because when you attach labels to it, it becomes conditional, right? And at least for who I am, the person I aspire to be, I aspire to be the type of person who gives and receives love unconditionally. Someone who is willing to meet other people where they are, not where he expects them to be, not setting a bar for them to meet, check boxes or criteria for them to fill out. To live with a more open heart, right? Because I've experienced for much of my life what it's like to live with a closed heart, a heart that had walls put up around it, a heart that was more solid than fluid. In that sense, I realized that if I'm gonna be able to really embody that way of being that compassionate person who's able to demonstrate unconditional love to all of those around him, especially himself, then it has to start with the people who, yes, admittedly, may have hurt him the most, caused him the most pain growing up, but also have been the ones who have always loved him no matter what. I've always loved him unconditionally. Yes, it may not have been perfect or ideal at times. Yes, it may not have looked like that sort of love you see, you hear about, you dream about as a kid. Love isn't meant to be perfect. None of us are meant to be perfect. None of us are perfect. And trying to perfect love is taking away from the essence of what it is entirely. So, That's why I'm home after a year. Some things have changed, but in reality, maybe that never changed at all. It just took me some time to really realize that. So, thank you for listening, for sharing this lovely evening with me. And with that, I'll catch you tomorrow.